be angry with those he respects.
It was a time when the President of the United States cast a dark cloud over the nation, stifling free speech and abusing the same powers that the American people had granted him. If the media, liberals, or others dared to question him or his administration, well, they were branded an enemy, and they were punished. The, quote, enemies were revealed on June 27, 1973, at a Watergate hearing on Capitol Hill. Former White House counsel John Dean turned over a series of documents detailing the methodical plot to, quote, use the available federal machinery to screw our enemies. On the list weren't just members of the press. They were politicians, union bosses, businessmen, even celebrities like Paul Newman, Barbara Streisand, Carol Channing, and Joe Namath. Former CBS chief Watergate correspondent Dan Shore was covering the story that day when he unexpectedly found himself part of the story.
I was outside the Senate caucus room live on camera on CBS.
Good morning. John Dean talked about a list of enemies. I'll first read their names first.
And I went down the list one by one.
So 1, Arnold Picker of United Artists. 16th, Congressman Ronald Dellums of California, who was black. 17th, Daniel Shore of the Columbia Broadcasting System in Washington. The note here is a real media enemy. Number 18.
And number 17 is Daniel Shore, a real media enemy, it says here. And I really felt as though I was going to collapse.
You take the poll and stand sure he is always creating something, isn't he? He incidentally is on, shouldn't get involved in this, but he's on our tax list too. Good.
There were stories that I did and commentaries that I did that did not agree and did not sit well with the president.
Fellow newsman Marvin Kalb was also on one of Nixon's hit lists.
I found out that I was on the enemies list, and I was shocked, absolutely shocked, and I must say totally appalled. Paul Newman, the actor, an enemy? Absurd. Marvin Kalb, Dan Shore, absurd. I understood that Richard Nixon had a problem with my reporting about the Vietnam War. It clearly was in his mind that I was some kind of a problem to him.
At one point, Nixon gave orders to call J. Edgar Hoover, get the FBI to get something on me.
He was examining my income tax. Nothing was ever found to be wrong. Criticism is perfectly acceptable in a free and open society. It doesn't matter whether Nixon is president or Obama is president. In an open, free society, the greatest guarantor of freedom is a free press.
It's almost 4 decades and 7 presidents later. But have times changed?
Freedom of speech and regulations on what you can say, what you can do. Nothing says American quite like good old-fashioned federal regulation. Yesterday, I showed you, thanks to the Environmental Protection Agency, we get a chance to express our love for the government intrusion in our lives with their Rulemaking Matters video contest. It is billed, I think it's propaganda, but it's billed as a chance to let Americans know how wonderful it is that, quote, almost every aspect of our lives is touched by federal regulations. How wonderful that is? Here's the EPA's exciting call to action.
We invite you to capture the public imagination and use creativity, artistic expression, and innovation to explain why regulations are important to everyone and motivate others to participate in the rulemaking process.
So we can all, don't you all just want to get together and just create new regulations? Wouldn't it be fun? Let's do it this weekend. We can make s'mores. Before you grab your camera and get started, may I just play devil's advocate here? And for fairness, explain why government regulations may not be the best idea. It's simple, really. When the government tries to get in the way of the free market, it makes things worse. For example, let's go with the government deciding a way to improve our lives was in housing. with the Community Reinvestment Act. Look this up, please. Write it down. Community Reinvestment Act. Look it up. It was updated in 1995 to put pressure on the banks. See if this sounds familiar. The government putting pressure on the banks to issue more risky loans so more people could own homes. I don't think any trouble came from that. The federal government now controls 90% of housing finance. Last I checked, the housing situation, I think aren't some people saying it's in a shambles? How about cafe standards? Businesses were left creating the cars the government wanted, not what the people wanted. Remember, they were against SUVs and trucks. What were we all driving? Yeah. Not only did automakers lose money, more people died in car accidents because of the smaller, unsafe cars that they now have to drive because we can't put all the safety standards in, because it makes them too heavy. It's been the same throughout history. FDR had the most spectacular failed attempt at government regulations when he created the National Recovery Administration in 1933. I want to show you this. This is the NRA. This is not the gun people. These are the crazy people. NRA, we do our part. The NRA actually forced companies to comply with price controls and codes. It was the small businesses. We're going to help the small business. Really? The small businesses, and this happens every time with government because they're in bed with the big business. Small business was hurt the most because it was the large companies that the government got together with and set the price. See, the government, see if this sounds familiar. Have you been invited, your small business, to the White House to sit down and have the power broker meetings that all of the big businesses have? See, with FDR, just like with Obama, he would bring in all of the big businesses, and they would set the price at such a level that worked for them, but not for the small businesses. One example of this was in the tire industry. The Ferris Tire and Rubber Company of Newark, Ohio. You, of course, remember Ferris, and you may have some of the Ferris. No, you don't have any Ferris tires? That's weird, because they were a very successful small tire company with about 1,000 employees run by Carl Ferris. He was a well-respected man in the community. At the time, FDR brought in, well, not Ferris, but three other groups. Brought in Goodyear, Goodrich, and Firestone, but not Ferris. It's weird that you've not heard about him, but you've heard about these guys. Ferris provided tough competition for these other three because he could mark his tires down. So when the big three wrote the new price codes, Ferris was in a jam because the price codes were higher than the discount prices he was charging. So it not only screwed the little businessman, but also the people buying tires, because it meant you had to go to the big three and get those tires that were more expensive. Ferris would lose money. He would eventually have to lay off each and every employee. Ferris was an honest man, so he followed the new rules and he lost money. He fired everybody in the end. There were others that didn't follow the code. There was a tailor in New Jersey, who's probably the most famous case. This guy got 30 days in jail. 30 days because he charged 35 cents for pressing a suit instead of the required 40 cents, because he was losing business because everybody were going to the more convenient dry cleaner. And he said, I'll charge 5 cents less. It was a father of four who said, I'm just going to charge less to press a suit. The father of four went to jail for 30 days. He had really believed FDR when FDR said, I'm going to help the little man. He actually stood in the courtroom in stunned silence when his sentence was announced. He stood there and he looked at the judge and then he looked at his attorney. He said later he was hoping that it was a joke. FDR and the New Deal changed the country. Agree or not with what happened or what direction we went to, it did change our direction. These agencies didn't exist before. These are the agencies that FDR created during the New Deal. Okay? Big government. We have never done this before. Big government. These are all of the agencies that he created under the New Deal. 2 pages. It's a lot. It transformed America. And each of these create more regulations. For every law that is passed, 10 regulations.